In today's video, I'm going to be jumping onto Lightroom and sharing with you my 4-step process on how to create this dreamy vintage film look in your photos just using Lightroom. And I'm going to start right now. Now, I recently visited Venice, Italy, which is a beautiful place, and I took the Leica Q3 with me, which is one of my favorite street photography cameras. And I've got to admit, I loved this particular camera and these photos, but I wanted to add a little bit more of a nostalgic, more of a dreamy film look to them. And today I'll be breaking that particular look down into 4 steps so you can replicate it on your photos, which is step 1, basic adjustments, step 2, which is color grading, step 3 is using masking, and then step 4, and I'll be showing you my secret on this, is how you can add in the right amount of grain and effects to your photo. So let's start off with step 1, which is basic adjustments. Okay, so this is the photo we're starting with. So what we're gonna do is jump over to the develop panel, and then what we're gonna do is jump down to the basic sliders. Now, in here, we're gonna make a couple of adjustments in overall exposure, but also texture, clarity, and dehaze. That will really bring out that dreamy look that we're after, especially in the highlights. So what we're gonna do is firstly, we're gonna go to profile here. I like using Adobe Standard, so we're gonna go ahead and select that like so. Now, I shot manual white balance for this, which is 5600 Kelvin, just because I was shooting in daylight. I'm not necessarily gonna change it, but if you're finding your white balance is off in your photo, make sure you adjust that before you go ahead and start color grading your photo. And then what we're gonna do is drop down to exposure here. Now, in exposure, what I might do is, I'm finding this photo quite bright. So if we have a look over at the histogram here, you can see there's a lot of information found on the right-hand side. So what I might do is I might just drop this down ever so slightly, probably by around about 0.5 of a stop. Not by much, but that brings a little bit more information over into the mid-tones. And then with contrast here, because we're gonna be adding in contrast later on using the tone curve, what I'm gonna do is actually gonna drop down contrast a little bit here as well. Now with highlights here, the sky is quite bright. So what I might do is bring down the highlights here. I'm gonna bring those down to probably around about -60. And it's the opposite problem in the shadows. I'm finding them a little bit too dark. If we zoom in, there's a little bit of detail that I really wanna bring out in this photo. So for the shadows here, what I'm gonna do is bring that up, but not by too much. I might bring it up by around about 25 in this example. Now with the whites and blacks here, I like bringing up the whites ever so slightly, but not by too much. And with the blacks, I want to add a bit more of a flatter film look to this image. So to achieve it quite quickly is just simply going to the black sliders here. I'm going to increase that to around about 30 there. So that's all I'm going to do predominantly with tone. So now let's move on to texture, clarity, and dehaze. With texture here, I like adding in around about 10%, not by much. And then I like going to clarity and really dropping this down. I'm probably going to drop it down by around about the maximum I would normally, which is around -25. And I'm gonna do exactly the same with dehaze. I'm gonna go dehaze here. I'm gonna drop that down to, I think I'm gonna go for -20 in this example. Now this will reduce contrast, but don't worry, we'll add that in later on. But most importantly, it's added this nice, softer, flatter look to this photo. And it works really well when creating this kind of dreamy look. We've only achieved a little bit in this shot, so we're gonna make it more prominent later on when we use masks, but it looks really nice when it's in its final outcome. So it might not look great at the moment, but don't worry, it will look a lot better later on. And now what we'll do is actually move on to vibrance and saturation. In reducing clarity and dehaze, it will also reduce a little bit of vibrance. So what we can do is actually increase that back into the photo. So I might go for 50 in this example. And then with saturation here, I'm gonna increase that a small amount. I'm gonna increase that by 10. Now, if you wanna know a little bit more on the difference between vibrance and saturation, go ahead and watch this video here, which I go into it. But basically, to summarize it, vibrance predominantly affects the mid-tone colors, where saturation controls all colors globally. So if you just want to affect more mid-tone colors, and the colors found roughly within the middle part of your exposure, then I would use vibrance. But most of the time, saturation pretty much does it all, just it is a lot stronger, so definitely bear that in mind. But again, if you want to know more, go ahead and watch that video. Now what we'll do is jump out of the basics here, and what we're gonna do is go down to tone curve. Now tone curve's a really great tool, especially if you wanna add in contrast into the exact parts that you want in the photo. Again, if you do wanna know more about the tone curve, I've actually got my masterclass video you can watch here. But in today's video, what we're gonna do is just create a very simple S-curve. So what I'm gonna do is bring up the brightness in the highlights you can see here. So I'll go for something like so, keeping an eye on your histogram in the top right-hand corner. And then what I'm gonna do is bring down ever so slightly those shadows. We'll go for something like so. And then the blacks here, I might actually create a little bit more of a mattier look. So I'm gonna go for something like so. Just bring up the last section. So the input of 0, which is pure black. And if you have that at anything higher than that, so output of 20, for example, you're removing those pure blacks from your photo, creating a bit more of a matte look. And you can see there's no longer blacks in this image if you have a look at your histogram. So overall, we've already done quite a lot to this photo. What I can do is quickly show you the before and after, creating a little bit more of a softer, more of a dreamier look. But let's really color grade this photo now. So let's move on to step 2, which is color grading. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do when color grading is I'm gonna add a little bit of color contrast to this photo. So make sure we're staying in the tone curve for this. So we open up the tone curve. Instead of actually going to the exposure here, we're gonna go to these 3 channels. These are red, green, and blue channels here. And what I actually like doing is adding a little bit more color contrast. Is what I'm gonna do is simply bring up the brightness in the red channel here, and then bring down in the shadows here. So what we're doing is we're brightening up a section of the red channel and darkening a section of that red channel as well. Then what we're gonna do is a quick simple trick. Right click on that, copy channel settings, go to your green channel and basically duplicate that effect. So we're gonna right click and then paste channel settings. Then we're gonna go to the blue here, right click and paste channel settings. What we've done is we're adding in a little bit more color contrast. It's different to simply the contrast slider because we're actually adding in and reducing contrast in those 3 channels, which makes it look a lot more realistic. And in my opinion, adds a little bit more color and a little bit more vibrancy to your photo. Again, I've actually made a dedicated video on this if you're interested in to learn more about it. But actually, I really like this particular effect. All I need to do is go to the tone curve. You can see the before and after of just using the tone curve. Already, this photo is really starting to pop. But okay, let's go out of the tone curve here, and now let's drop all the way down to calibration. Now, I love the calibration tool. We're not gonna go majorly into this video. We're just gonna be simply affecting the red, green, and blue primary channels. So in the hue here of red, we'll go here first. What I'm gonna do is increase that by a small amount. Now, if you go extreme, you can see what we're doing. We're actually adding in a little bit more. We're changing the color of that red found within the photo. Now, I don't want to go for an extreme amount, but around about +10 adds a little bit more yellows to those reds, adds a little bit more oranges instead of adding in those purples, which I do like when it really works with this brickwork you can see here in Venice. Now in green here, we're gonna have a little bit of the opposite effect. We're gonna make the greens a little bit more yellow, but again, not by much. So we're gonna go drop that down by around about -10. And then we've got the blue here. Again, we can adjust it between more darker blues and brighter blues. Now this predominantly affects the sky, and I like adding a little bit more of a tealy look to my sky when I'm going for more of this kind of vintage look. So with that hue there, I'm gonna go ahead and slide that over, but a little bit more extreme. Again, if we go really far, you can see that it's actually muddying that water. So we wanna avoid that. So we're gonna go for about -25 in this example. And as you can see, if I do the before and after of just the calibration tool, do the before and after, we've added a little bit more of a softer look, a bit more of a tealy look in the sky there. Okay, so let's turn off calibration and let's go over to Color Mixer, by far my favorite tool when it comes to color grading. And it's split into 3 sections. You've got hue, saturation, and luminance. Hue is the type of color. So green is a hue, blue is a hue. Saturation is the intensity of that color. So for example, in the red channel, you can increase the amount or the intensity of red found within your photo. And then luminance is the brightness of that color. So if again, we take red as an example, we can brighten that red or darken that red. And it's split into 8 color bands from red all the way down to magenta. Now you can view it in a few different ways. I like viewing it in HSL format. You can adjust that by going down to color. So you can actually affect all the color bands independently from each other. You can affect hue, saturation, and luminance, or how I like doing it is affecting hue first, then saturation, then luminance. Okay, so let's start off with hue first. Now, I like skipping out reds and oranges, just in case there's any skin tones found within the photo. You don't want to be changing that in your image, so I usually skip out reds and oranges when it comes to hue. So if we go over to yellow here, what I actually like doing is adding a little bit more green. So I might go for around about +15 there. Then with here, green, next, I'm gonna add in a little bit more green. So I'm gonna go for around about 25 or 20. Let's go for 25 in this example. You can see we're making a small difference, mostly noticeable in the foliage you can see in the kind of right-hand side of this photo. Then with aqua here, I'm actually gonna increase that by the most, and again, predominantly affects the sky, the aquas. And I'm probably gonna go for around about 50, I think, in this example. And then with the blue here, again, adding a little bit more teal to that sky. I'm gonna reduce that down by a small amount, probably around about -10. And what we'll do is we'll skip out purple and magenta. Okay, so let's move over to saturation Again, try and skip out reds and oranges if you can, although I might reduce the oranges in this photo a small amount, probably -10. That usually seems to work. But again, any more than that, you start ruining skin tones, and that's definitely something you want to avoid. What we'll do is we'll go to yellow next, and what we'll do is we'll drop that down probably by a little bit more. Probably go for, let's go for about -20 in this example. Then with greens, we'll really drop those greens down. We'll probably drop them down by around about -30. That's removing that kind of odd color cast you'll see in the water there, although we will fix that when it comes to masking. And then we've got aquas here. We'll probably reduce those down a little bit. We'll probably go for, no, let's increase them slightly. Let's go for around about 5 there. And then with blue there, I'm gonna reduce that down a little bit further, adding a bit more softer effect to the sky. So we'll probably go for about -30. Let's go for -30 there. And then again, what we'll do is we'll ignore, actually no, I think what we'll do is, because there's a little bit of magenta found over here, what I might do is reduce that down. Let's go for -40, and the magenta there will do exactly the same, -40 there. So you can see, because we've added in saturation and vibrancy earlier, it allows us to control how much is in the image when we go into HSL later on. So you can add in more color than you need, and then remove the parts you don't want to in the saturation part of the hue, saturation, and luminance sliders inside the color mixer tool. Okay, and then lastly, let's go over to luminance. Now luminance here, I like increasing the reds slightly, so we'll go for +10 there. Then we'll go to oranges there, again, not a small amount, we'll just go for +5. Yellows here, I like increasing the brightness of those yellows. Again, just affecting these foliage on the right-hand side. So we'll go for about 15 there, I think. Now let's really brighten up those greens. Let's go for 50. And then lastly, I think we'll go to blues here and we'll increase that by a small amount, kind of bleaching out that sky slightly. Let's go for 10 in this example. So you can see, color mixer, simply broken down, making a couple of adjustments already. Before and after, we've already made a slight difference. But next, what we'll do is we'll go into color grading. Now, color grading is a great way to add a specific color to a certain tonal area of your photo, like shadows, midtones, and highlights. You can add a color cast over that section of your tonal photo. So what we're gonna do, shadows first. Now, I like adding in a nice deep blue for this. So I'm probably gonna go for a hue of 200. So that's more of a lighter blue we can see here. And all I'm gonna do is I'll add that in. We'll add in a small amount, so I might add in around about 10 there. That adds a little bit more blue to the photo, because you'll find, especially in vintage film, the white balance isn't perfect. Now, we don't wanna go for the wrong white balance, we just wanna go for a slight tint in the shadows to make it look like it's slightly off. Not completely off to make it look like it's wrong, just enough to make it look vintage, if that makes sense. So we'll go for that. Now in the midtones here, I like going for a similar effect, but go for a slightly darker blue this time. So in the midtones here, I'll probably go for a hue of 210 in this example. And then again, saturation just adds that in. So we'll probably go for a lesser amount, so maybe around about 8 in this example. And then the highlights here, I like adding in a bit more of a warmer tone to it. So instead of going for blue, what we'll do is we'll go for more of an orange. We'll probably go for a 30 in this example. And again, we'll add that in. Now again, if you go too far, ruins the image. So a nice soft amount. We'll probably go for around about 10 in this example. So you can see a little bit of blue to the shadows, a little bit of blue to the midtones, and then a little bit of a warmer color to those highlights there. And you can see, if we go before and after, we've already made a decent impact. But let's make the biggest impact of all by moving on to step 3, which is masking. Now, inside the masking panel, what we need to do is head over from Edit. We'll go over to our masking panel here. We're gonna make, I think, 3 or 4 masks in this example. So the first mask I like doing is adding a nice blooming, nice mist effect to the highlights. Now to do that, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and select Radial Gradient. I'm gonna go ahead and make a nice big radial gradient. I'm gonna really soften out that feather to 100%. So we've got this nice big soft feather radial gradient here. I'm gonna go ahead and place that on the right-hand side. Now, what you want to do is look where the shadows are in your image. So I'm obviously placing this on the right. We can see that the shadows are found on the left-hand side. So the sun is on the right-hand side of this image. So we want to add it to the right. Make sure, look at your image and kind of depict where that sun is going to be, where that brightness is going to be. So I'm placing it on the right-hand side. I might make it a little bit more elliptical. Now what I'm going to do is, to make that blooming effect, what we want to do is go to Texture, Clarity and Dehaze. I'm going to drop Texture by -10. Clarity by -20, and dehaze by -20. Then I'm going to go all the way up to exposure here. I'm gonna brighten that up, usually plus 0.75. So we'll go for something like so. And you can see we're creating this nice soft effect. Now what I might do is make it a little bit bigger and drop it down a little bit further. Now, anytime you add in brightness to a photo, you also want to add in darkness as well. So brights and then shadows, adding a bit more, basically like dodging and burning your image, but using masks instead. Now, I don't like using the same mask to do that. So let's go ahead and create a new mask. And this time, instead of using radial gradient, we're gonna do linear gradient, but this time we're gonna add in onto the left-hand side of the image. So brightness on the right, darkness on the left. So I'm gonna go for an effect like this, basically covering mostly the ground, appearing on the left-hand side first, darkness. And then what I'm going to do is go to my exposure here and darken that down. And we can see we're getting this really nice kind of contrasty effect. Now, if you've got any subject in the way, you don't want that necessarily to be affecting with the mask. So what we can do is actually go to mask 2 here. I'm gonna go ahead and click on my mask settings, intersect with, and I'm gonna go ahead and select subject, and hopefully it will cut out that boat. Now it's done it, but it's done actually the wrong way round. So select subject, I'm gonna go ahead and click invert, and you can see now that mask isn't actually affecting that boat there, which is really nice. And we can actually show that in our overlay here. If we go ahead and turn on overlay, you can see it's not affecting that boat, which is really nice. So again, you don't want it to necessarily affect your subject. So I might go for an effect like so. Okay, now what I wanna do is cut out that sky. I wanna add a little bit more blue to that sky, a little bit more of a gradient to that. So to do that again, create new mask. I'm gonna go ahead and select sky, and hopefully it will do a nice cutout. Perfect. All I'm gonna do here is simply go to my temperature here. I'm gonna reduce that temperature down, probably by around about minus 25 there, adding in a bit more blue to that sky. And that's all you're gonna need to do. Simply change the temperature. It works really well. And if you wanna add a little bit more green to it, go to your tint here. You can add in more green, make it look a little bit more tealy if you wanted to. You can really use the temperature and tint slider to change the color if you want to, which is exactly what I'm gonna be doing to the water. Now, Venice isn't famous for the clearest water, I have to admit. It was quite green when I went. So what we can do is fake it. Add a little bit more blue to the water. And to do that, I like going to create new mask. I'm gonna drop down to where it says brush. Now what I'm gonna do is paint a small area where there's water. So I'm gonna go for something like so, just as a test. And then what I'll do is gonna go down to our temperature here, and again, add more blue. So I'm gonna go for probably around about minus 35, and then simply just paint the rest of it. Now this might take some time, depending on how complicated your background is. So I'm gonna speed this section up of the video. Okay, so not the best one I've ever done. I try and do it as quickly as possible. Just want to kind of show you guys what you end up with. We'll go and turn off overlay. You can see we've got this nice blue now. Now it doesn't look totally realistic. So what I might do is just simply reduce the amount of blue in this photo. So I might go for minus 35, and I might actually just simply go to the saturation here and actually just simply drop that saturation down ever so slightly, just so it's not so vivid blue, because obviously that does look a little bit unrealistic. So I might drop that down to around about minus 30 there. So you can see with 4 masks, we've made a massive impact. What I can do is show you the before and the after. We've got this nice contrast coming in, we've got this nice blooming effect, as well as we've got some nice shadows. Okay, so let's move on to step 4, which is effects. Okay, so when it comes down to effects, I usually like adding in 2, a post-cropping vignette, and then most importantly, adding in grain, but finding the exact right amount of grain for your photo. Now, when it comes down to vignetting, don't like adding in too much when it comes to photos like this, just because half of the image is really bright. So what I might do is just reduce that down ever so slightly, might go for minus 10 in this example, and then I like going to feather here, and then especially when you've got a nice bright sky like this, I'm gonna go ahead and increase that all the way to 100%. Adding in a nice, soft, very subtle vignette. Now, when it comes to grain, what I like doing is firstly, zooming into 100%, finding something with plenty of detail. So this boat in Venice is a great example. And then what you wanna do is have a look at something with detail, then go to your amount slider and start adding in until you start noticing it. So I'm probably gonna go for around about 25 in this example. We can really start to see that grain coming through. I might actually go for 30 in this example, add a little bit more grain. Then with size, reduce it all the way down, then start adding in, and the larger you go, the less resolution the image will be. So I'm probably gonna go for 20 in this example. And then with roughness, again, lower it all the way down, then start adding it in until you are happy with the result. I see a lot of people just jump straight to the maximum and just end up looking right. So start off with 0 and then slowly and steadily add in your roughness or add in your grain. And I'm gonna go for a grain amount like so. What I might do in just this example, I might actually increase the grain a little bit further because I really want to be prominent in the image here. But that's my secret. Zoom into something with a decent amount of detail, then reduce everything down to 0, and then slowly and steadily add it in until you find the exact amount for your image. So for this image, I'm going to go for 40, 20, and 35 when it comes to grain. If I go ahead and zoom out, this photo has made a total transformation. What I can do is show you the before and then show you the after. And you can see we've got this nice blooming effect, and that's thanks to firstly masking, but most importantly, dropping down your texture, clarity, and dehaze. And if you want even more of an impact, you can reduce it down even further. So here is the raw image. Here is step 1, step 2, step 3, and then lastly, step 4. And there we have it. That is how you can create this dreamy vintage film look in your photos just using Lightroom. And if you like this look and want to support the channel, go ahead over to my website where I've got a whole range of custom Lightroom presets available to purchase. So if you want to support this channel as well as get some awesome presets to speed up your editing workflow in Lightroom, make sure to go ahead to the link in the description. I've been James for Photo Fever, and I'll catch you guys next time.